Let's get you ready for Sludge. In the Sludge project, your group is going to be given a couple of liquids, 2 soluble solids, and then a mixture of insoluble solids and water. So you're going to have to separate them out from one another and then identify every single unknown that you have. You're going to be given a large packet of all the possible things that could be in your sludge, and your team is going to collect evidence to try and figure out what those unknowns are. So how about separating stuff? One great tool is using a magnet, because then you can figure out which of your solids, if any, have magnetic properties, and then just use the magnet to pull those away from your other solids. You can also just look at the solids based on their color, their shininess, and other features. You can use tweezers to separate solids from other solids. How to get the insoluble solids separated from your liquid, you can do a couple of things. One is decanting. That's just pouring the liquid off of your solid. And another thing that we've done before and that you can do in this lab is a filtration. So you fold a filter paper in half and then in half again, stick it inside a funnel, put that funnel so that it drains into a flask, for example, and then you'll pour your mixture into that filter paper and the liquid will drip through and the solid will stay on the filter paper for you to identify. You're not going to have to do this in the lab because the equipment is a little bit finicky, but just so you know, you can separate liquids from each other. It's called distillation. You heat up the liquids, and the one that has the lower boiling point, let's say you've got a mixture of ethanol and water in here, ethanol would turn into a vapor around 80 degrees, and it can travel up this column, and there'll be a cooling feature down on the condenser, and it literally condenses that ethanol vapor back into ethanol and collects it as pure over in this flask. Then you kind of move that flask out of the way once the temperature of the remaining liquid has risen to 100 degrees Celsius. That's when the water is boiling, and then you would collect that water. What if you had to separate the soluble solids from a liquid? We've already done this, so we're not going to have you do this in Sludge, but you would boil away all the water and you would leave behind a salt. How about identifying? This will be the bulk of what your team is working on. So how about those solids? You are going to have, again, that list of all the possible insoluble solids we may have given you. So you're going to compare their appearance to what you've got. You're going to burn your insoluble solids, see if they melt. So you'll be putting those in a flame for about 2 minutes. And you can test the density of those insoluble solids, put the pieces on a scale to find their mass, and then fill a graduated cylinder and put all the pieces into the water and see how much the volume goes up. Do a simple subtraction to find out the volume of your insoluble solid, and then you'll take the mass divided by the volume to figure out the density of your unknown. And like we mentioned, you can use magnets as well. For the liquids, your liquids have an appearance as well. Some liquids have a color, some don't. Flammability, certain liquids are flammable, others are not. Density, you can take the mass divided by the volume of a liquid as well. It's actually easier than doing it for a insoluble solid. You zero out a balance, put the smallest graduated cylinder you have on it, pour about 5 milliliters of your liquid into the graduated cylinder, and look at the actual volume. Is it 5.0 milliliters, for example? Read the mass from the scale, and then do mass divided by volume to calculate your density. You can also identify a liquid based on its boiling point. So start heating it up, put a thermometer in it, and record the temperature at which it starts to boil. And how about those soluble solids? Add some water to them, dip the paper towel into it, and then burn it. See what color it turns a flame. Different positive ions will turn the flame different colors. And then to figure out what the negative ion is, the anion, you can add some hydrochloric acid and silver nitrate separately to samples of your soluble solid solution and see what happens. As you can tell from these tables, if it reacts with HCl in that it forms bubbles, you probably have a carbonate for the anion. And you can double check and see what happens with silver nitrate. If nothing happens, then that's pretty good evidence that you've got a carbonate. If you add acid and your pH goes from 12 to 10, well, that's neutralizing. So you may have a hydroxide. And then if you double check with the silver nitrate and you see a brown precipitate form, a brown solid, that's further supporting evidence that you probably have hydroxide. So that's just a little preview. It's easier once you've got all the materials and you're actually doing it yourself. So the Sludge project is often remembered as the most fun lab that we do all year because it's challenging and it's a lot of independent work. So I hope you enjoy being a scientist.